This is a prepaid call from
Jesse.
an inmate at the county correctional facility. All phone calls are subject to recording and monitoring. To decline this call, press 9 now, and to accept this call, press 1 now.
Let's talk about the first phone call I made while I was in jail. I didn't look like this. I was barely 18 years old. I was sitting in the jail. I was wearing those black and white stripes like you'd see from the old convict movies. I was wasted away. I was 150 or less pounds. Basically a lost, scared kid who had just blown his entire life up. I'd committed the robbery, I'd committed the shooting, and I thought we were getting out of town. I didn't think there would be consequences. The day I was arrested, I went to say goodbye to an old high school girlfriend. She said, "Jesse, I don't want you to go to jail." I remember laughing and thinking, like, why would I go to jail? Not thinking that I had just committed a robbery and just committed a shooting. But the thing I was worried about was whether those people were going to come back and kill me, because that was my main concern, was who was going to get me, who was going to hurt me, not who was going to arrest me. And in that way, being arrested was almost like being rescued, or at least stopped, because I didn't know how to stop myself. I didn't know how to stop the cocaine. I didn't know how to stop the drinking. I didn't know how to stop any of the insanity. So being arrested was, in a way, the thing that stopped me when I couldn't stop myself. So I was sitting in the jail after I was arrested, after I refused to give a statement. They locked me in R&D, which is receiving and discharge. It's basically where you go when you first get to jail to be, basically prove that you don't have lice or something else that's going to contaminate the rest of the jail. And I sat in there for quarantine and just basically slept. Go to sleep. I would wake up when they would put the styrofoam tray on the door. I would eat whatever meal they had and I went back to sleep, because I've been so strung out and so without sleep and so without any kind of healthy anything for so long, and my body just shut down. Once the cocaine was gone, once the cigarettes were gone, once everything was gone, my body just wanted sleep. While I was in that cell, there was no phone. Now, there was a phone out in the little day room area, but you had to be escorted to get out there. And in R&D, you weren't ever allowed out unless you were going to the shower. It was just difficult to get to. But after a few days there, they moved me to a receiving block. And this was just a tiny block on the old side of the jail where we were all in a dormitory, all packed in there together. But there was a phone, there was a shower, and there was a sink. Remember, I took a shower, and I was excited about that because somebody let me use shower shoes and warned me how disgusting the floors were going to be, and that I didn't ever want to stick my bare feet down there. But there was also a phone. And I was both excited because it meant I could call, but I was also terrified because, like I said, I had just turned 18 years old, and the only people I knew to call were my parents. I didn't know if my parents knew where I was. I didn't know if they knew I had gotten in trouble. I didn't realize that we were front page news, that everybody in town knew we had gotten in trouble. But I was sitting in there, and I remember having to call and not knowing what to do. And so finally one day I worked up the courage, and there were not a lot of people using the phone, so worked up the courage, and I walked up there and I dialed my mom's number. I dialed her home number. Again, maybe she knew, maybe she was at home depressed. She didn't answer. So I dialed her work number and she picked up the phone. And she was panicked and she was lost and she was all the things. I mean, my mom tended to panic. My mom tended to have anxiety. And I remember her having all those feelings and not knowing what to do with them, and me not knowing what I could do. I actually wrote about this kind of extensively in my book, but then basically saying, okay, well, the phone call's over because it says you've got 60 seconds remaining. I'll call you again later sometime. But leading up to that phone call, I was sure that my mother hated me. I was sure that my father hated me. Not that I actually had any reason to believe that, but I hated myself so much. I could not imagine that anyone would not hate me for having caused all this harm, for having disappointed everyone, for having done everything that I did. I remember hanging up and she was just panicked and trying to figure out how to fix it and trying to figure out how to make things better. And she'd always tried to do that. She'd always tried to fix things. And one of the things that I've realized about being a friend or potentially being a parent one day is that so often what's needed isn't someone to fix things, it's someone to just be there. And now in this situation, obviously she wanted to fix it for a very good reason, but I just remember that familiar panic and that familiar anxiety and how uncomfortable I felt with it. Next person I called was my father, and my dad didn't know what to do with himself because my dad had raised me on gangster stories and the crazy life that he'd lived and the things that he'd gotten away with. I mean, literally he would raise me and he would tell me about the stuffed animals on my bed and how there was a magic kingdom that I could go to visit them, and then pivot straight to, and when we smuggled drugs across the border and we did this and we shut down the munitions factory and when we got all these guns and we built all these bombs. And so I didn't know growing up what was normal or what wasn't normal. And the normal for me growing up was definitely not normal for a lot of people. So growing up with that idea of being a gangster, growing up that idea that you don't snitch. I mean, that was the reason I didn't give a statement, is because you don't snitch. My dad told me, you keep your mouth shut. Growing up with that, I didn't know how to process what it was to be a person. I didn't know how to process, the things that I'd done. I just kind of had all these different influences in my mind. But my dad was pretty much broken because I think in those moments, and I know some of the times I talked to him after that, he blamed himself. And he talked about, this is about the sins of the father. Basically, he was saying the things that he had done had been visited upon me, which is a biblical concept. And my dad was not a religious guy, but he'd grown up in a Mormon family. And anytime he got extremely stressed or he was really under-resourced, he would start using biblical language. And it was like a flashback to his childhood or a flashback to things he'd learned when he was young and the way he thought. And despite him not being a religious person, he took a lot of those things and he kind of ran with them, or that was kind of how he lived his life. And I think he blamed himself because of the stories that he had told me or the things he exposed me to or the ideas that he shared. And so I think my dad, as I was sitting in that jail calling him on the phone, was blaming himself and thinking this was his fault. And of course, this was my fault. Like, I was the one who got strung out on drugs. I was the one who committed the robbery. I was the one who committed the shooting. I also understand why he felt the way that he did. I understand why he looked back and said, man, maybe I shouldn't have done those things or talked about those things. And over the years that I was in prison before he died, he talked about that. And we shared about like what influenced me or what hopes I had or what things I wanted to achieve. And I got a better understanding not only of his issues or his insecurities or things he had shared, but also things that I struggled with, both as a result of, things that he shared with me and also as a result of my own insecurities, my own issues and things I didn't know how to deal with. And, I get to learn, hey, you know what? This is really what I needed from my dad, but I didn't know how to ask because I was a kid and I didn't have that language. But these were the things I needed, or this was what I wanted, or this is how I would have shown up for myself if I had known then what I know now. And I look back at that when I go into the juvenile center to work or when I go work with kids or mentor kids, I think back to those days, to the things that I really wanted that I may not have known how to ask for, may not have even known that I needed. So I learned a lot from that experience and that first phone call to mom, to dad, that I was so terrified because dad was another one. I thought he was going to hate me. I mean, my dad had always had my back, just like my mom had always had my back. But I was convinced that I'd finally done the thing that would make them just forsake me. Like, I'd committed these crimes, I'd caused this harm, I'd caused this destruction. How could anybody love me? Because I definitely didn't love myself. Now, however that happened, whatever happened, I managed to get to the point where I was turning my life around. And a lot of that credit was to my mother and to my father who believed in me and helped me get in school and helped me move forward and helped me build something out of nothing or build something out of the rubble that I created. But that first phone call was so nerve-wracking and so aggravating and so difficult that I was just glad to be done. I remember I got off the phone and I went and I laid down in my bunk and I just covered my eyes and just laid there probably for hours because I felt like all the energy I had was gone. Like, I'd spent it all on those phone calls because I didn't have anything left.